Welcome to Random Flyer, the podcast that brings you the true stories of New Zealand's aviation pioneers, the machines they flew, and the decisions that shaped the skies we fly through today. Today we're going to look at the Fokker Friendship, and it's all about how New Zealand National Airways Corporation, or NAC, made one of the most consequential fleet decisions in its history, the replacement of the Douglas DC-3. The DC-3 had served New Zealand well since the 1940s. It was durable, reliable, and beloved by pilots and passengers alike. But by the mid-1950s, air travel was growing. New Zealanders wanted more speed, more comfort, and above all, they wanted more capacity. Douglas workhorse was starting to show its age. The first public mention of a replacement appeared in the press in Christchurch in March 1954. The article cited increased demand for air travel and listed three possible successors to the DC-3, all of which were turboprops: the Vickers Viscount, the Handley Page Herald, and the Dutch-designed Fokker F-27 Friendship. At the time though, NAC's general manager J.J. Bush made it clear, whatever they bought, it would almost certainly be British. But the story, of course, was more complicated. Early estimates for the proposed aircraft showed promising improvements. The Viscount could cut the Auckland to Wellington route down to 1 hour 30 minutes. The Friendship would only be 5 minutes slower, while the Herald trailed at 2 hours 5 minutes. The DC-3 still slogging along at 2 hours 10. At Christmas in 1954 though, a visit by Fokker's technical sales director and test pilot, Mr. Burgerhout, added weight to the Dutch bid. Burgerhout's demonstrations and the quoted price of £165,000 began to shift NAC's interest. Less than a year later, in August 1955, two NAC officials were in England conducting a final study. They interviewed engineers and executives at Vickers and Handley Page and even spent some time at Rolls-Royce. Then came a flurry of activity. In March 1956, Fokker's senior sales team began talks in Wellington. They pitched the Friendship as a 45-seat twin-engine aircraft ideal for regional services that could support the larger long-range Viscounts. By 1957, delays with British production had begun to sour the mood. The Herald was encountering serious manufacturing and testing problems, while Fokker had pushed ahead and the Friendship was on schedule, fully flying and drawing international orders. By February 1958, the Herald was still at least 18 months away from delivery, while the Friendship could be operational in just 6 to 8 months. But all of this depended on one critical factor: the state of New Zealand's runways. Most provincial airports in New Zealand had unsealed grass airstrips, and whatever aircraft NAC chose, those runways would need to be upgraded. They need to be sealed and lengthened and strengthened. Sir Leonard Izzet, chairman of the corporation, tried to calm public fears by saying that the work wasn't as costly as many feared, but it was still going to be a big commitment. In March 1958, Minister of Transport, Mr. Matheson, made headlines by publicly voicing his personal preference for the Fokker Friendship. By May 1958, Trans-Australian Airlines, TAA, had ordered 12 Friendships. This was a big deal because it meant that there would be a fleet and a supply of spares locally. A demonstration flight was arranged for September. By December 1958, consensus had grown. The Friendship was the frontrunner. But the story didn't just end there. January 1959 brought a curveball, the Avro 748, which would eventually become the Hawker Siddeley 748, used by Mount Cook Airline. By March, the board was still undecided. J.J. Bush stated that both the Herald and the Friendship were still in the running. The Herald was cheaper, but the Friendship, he said, would be more economical in the long run. In April 1959, Izzet was forced to publicly deny any political pressure to choose the British Herald. He pointed out that the Friendship was already using British engines, British undercarriage components, and British electrical systems. Still, in the interest of caution, the board postponed the decision by 6 months. They expected to eventually buy around 10 aircraft, but only as airports were upgraded to take them. In July 1959, the price of the Fokker had risen to £215,000 per unit. The British plane, by contrast, was holding steady at £170,000, and that was enough for Prime Minister Nash to delay a cabinet decision. Meanwhile, Technical concerns about the F-27's single-engine performance, especially when departing Wellington, caused further delays. Demonstrations and scrutiny intensified. In October 1959, an F-27 finally visited NAC's engineering base at Harewood in Christchurch. From there it flew a carefully orchestrated tour of the South Island, grassfield tests in Dunedin and Invercargill, single-engine trials in Nelson and Christchurch, and a grand tour of the North Island. The Handley Page Herald followed, but its reception was muted. There were no technical evaluations reported. Instead, it offered schoolchildren joyrides and essay competitions. Behind the scenes, tensions flared. In October 6, 1969, NAC prepared a confidential 6-page memo defending the F-27. It promptly leaked. The memo was blunt. The Herald was still in development. The F-27 was flying. The Dart engines were compatible with existing fleet maintenance for the Viscount. The Herald's upgraded Dart engines were not compatible and would cost more to operate, but would not deliver any more speed. Handley Page's PR fired back. Their rep, Mr. Scuffham, said Fokker had overstated the payload and that the Friendship was overpriced. But Fokker struck back again, arguing that comparing a flying aircraft to a design still on the drawing board wasn't fair play. Even the demonstration teams got involved. Group Captain A.F. Bandit of Handley Page accused TAA of unfairly supporting Fokker's bid, but the damage was done. The public, and much of the government, had made up their minds. November 10, 1959, the New Zealand government announced it would buy 4 Fokker Friendships. A 4th British Viscount was added to the order to boost the British content to 63%. The first F-27 would arrive in October 1960 and fly the Auckland, Palmerston North, Wellington, Christchurch and Invercargill routes. Pilots were trained in Melbourne alongside their TAA counterparts. But even now, the runways were still a major issue. The Civil Aviation Administration ruled that Fokker Friendships could not operate commercially from grass strips. This excluded Hamilton, Tauranga, Gisborne, New Plymouth and several others from taking Fokker Friendship service. The government pledged to work with local councils to get those runways sealed, but only if the councils paid 50% of the cost. Whanganui made the first move, Napier followed, but in Dunedin the hangars weren't big enough to house a Friendship. That meant no overnight aircraft and no early morning service, a major setback. Even as the planes started arriving in 1961 and 1962, NAC was under pressure. The cost of acquiring the new aircraft, before the airports were ready to use them, led to overcapacity due to the restrictions on flying to unsealed airports, and led to financial strain. In fact, in 1963, one of the new Friendships had to be leased out for 14 months, just to relieve the burden. But slowly the infrastructure caught up. Whanganui, 1960, Dunedin, 1962. But slowly the infrastructure caught up, and the airports became sealed. Whanganui, 1960, Dunedin, 1962, Napier and Rotorua, 1964, Hamilton and Gisborne, 1965, Tauranga, 1967, and Westport, 1970. The Friendships flew on, serving NAC and later Air New Zealand for decades. By the end of the 60s, over 500 had been built. The Handley Page Herald, just 50. It wasn't just an aircraft NAC chose, it was a future built on sealed runways, longer routes, and more modern technology. Thanks for listening to Random Flyer today. If you like today's story, please share it with your fellow aviation buffs. Until then, clear skies.